Welcome to Perverted Justice. This is not just a story. It's a call to action for integrity and radical honesty, in spite of personal cost. Now here's your host, Shielagh Clark.
Welcome back. This is episode 12. I am trying to sit far away from the mic and talk loudly. We'll see how this goes. So last week I covered the prosecution and I ended on a bit of a negative note. I did that because I wanted the weight of the reality of what the church stole from me to be evident. They did a wicked thing for which they have never apologized because they are not sorry. I'll cover this more in later episodes, but one of the most deceptive tactics that Hyde Park Baptist Church leadership used during the litigation was willful ignorance. Most of them deliberately kept themselves in the dark about what their attorney was doing so that later they could claim, "We didn't know." They wanted the freedom to disown the cruelty and dishonesty of the litigation process while still benefiting from its results. They want you to believe that they aren't responsible for how I was treated because it was just the lawyers doing the acting. Murray even claimed in 2022 that I was actually suing the insurance company, not the church, so that he could say he had no deciding power in how things went. They didn't want to stop the abuse of the legal system. They just didn't want to be caught directly participating in it. On top of that, the board member who was communicating with their attorney cherry-picked information to feed to the congregation in order to manipulate them into thinking a certain way about me and about the lawsuit. He claimed to be operating from a place of duty to keep the church informed, but what he was actually doing was only feeding them partial facts that would produce the response he wanted them to have, which was that I was trying to destroy the church and needed to be opposed and ignored. We also touched a little bit on the way that they demonized me, said that I was immoral for suing them, and how completely hypocritical it is for them to have held that position for so long and in such a central way, while they also were suing Jonathan Weaver in order to help him avoid a guilty plea. But back to Weaver's conviction, I'm going to focus on maybe a slightly more positive twist. So as you heard last week, and I'm sure you remember personally living it, the courts were struggling to function due to the changes with COVID, and they were opening and closing, trying to find a new way forward. But while proceedings were virtual, I was able to listen in and get a feel for what the judges were like. The judge hadn't been chosen for my case yet, but the advocate said that it was down to two options, a crotchety old man or a female. So I was popping into their virtual courtrooms and kind of just trying to get a feel for what they were like. And one day I actually heard the old man laugh off a domestic violence case by a repeat offender whose victim had decided not to press charges. He actually said, while laughing, "I don't know what power you have over these women." I was so disgusted that a man on the bench could think that the fear that this man was controlling women with to get away with multiple acts of violence was funny. And I just really hoped I wouldn't end up in his courtroom. And thank God, I got the woman. So sentencing was scheduled for April 15 of 2021. The courts opened back up for in-person proceedings before this, but they had very limited capacity. So my husband, therapist, and victim advocate were the only ones who were allowed to accompany me into the building, and only my husband and victim advocate made it actually all the way into the courtroom. So most of my family and several friends gathered outside the courthouse to show their support. And the judge actually opened the virtual courtroom just for my hearing because she knew that my large family was stuck outside on the sidewalk, so they were able to tune in virtually even though they weren't allowed into the building. And just want to brag on my sisters for a second. They went above and beyond to make sure that I was supported that day. They got everyone to wear teal, which is the sexual assault awareness color, and they made signs so that everyone passing by the group would know why they were gathered there. My support group raced through the building to surround Weaver and his wife, booing loudly as they approached and vacated the building. The whole group was all in, and I could not have asked for better support that day. Also, I was actually being followed by a film crew that day for the docu-series exposing abuse in the independent fundamental Baptist movement called Let Us Pray, P-R-E-Y, which aired on HBO in November of 2023. I eventually hired an attorney to pull myself completely from that film for reasons that I won't get into here, but I'm noting this just so that I can let you know that I regret allowing this filming because it severely restricted what we captured for ourselves and what I subsequently have to memorialize the day and to help my children understand, my younger children understand what really happened that day. So after all of her compassionate talk in our meetings, the solicitor abruptly changed her tune right at the end, which I realize now was because she made a deal with the devil and accepted the last-minute Alford plea in order to avoid a delay in the conviction. She wanted the case handled and effectively betrayed me in that process. In our last call, I repeatedly asked her why Weaver was willing to plead guilty when the civil motion to dismiss was still pending. She told me she doesn't get involved in that and then raised her voice, scolding me for asking too many questions. This happened with my civil attorneys on a number of occasions also. I shrank or cried in response to an attorney telling me that I was being too much for wanting to know and understand what the heck was going on. Some advocates like to think of themselves as the savior and expect survivors to just fall in line with the rescue plan. Any advocate who is truly for you will encourage you to advocate for yourself by understanding and challenging them in the process. The whole point is to be strong enough to stand up for yourself and for others, not to keep being small and quiet the way you were when you were being abused. Anyway, the solicitor told me on that last call also that she was going to give Weaver's attorney a copy of my victim impact statement ahead of the hearing. I vehemently opposed this, and she insisted that it's just the way things are with COVID. I was in tears, and she hung up angry. My advocate called me back right after that, like almost as soon as I hung up, she was calling me back. And she promised me that Weaver would not be receiving a copy of my statement ahead of time. I told her that I was making several changes to it anyway, so it wasn't current. She said she didn't understand why the solicitor was acting the way that she was acting, and tried to offer some comfort. So I don't actually have any idea if he did get a copy of that draft ahead of time or not. I lost a lot of faith in the justice system there at the end. Read some portions of the court transcript so that you can hear what happened in the courtroom. Mr. Weaver, you are here today to plead to 2 counts of assault and battery of a high and aggravated nature that was under the statute as it was in 2001, which carries up to 10 years. Is that your understanding? Defendant Weaver, yes. The court, have you discussed these charges with your lawyer? Defendant Weaver, yes. Court, are you happy with what your lawyer has done for you? Defendant Weaver, yes. The court, are you under the influence of drugs or alcohol? Defendant Weaver, no. Has anyone forced you to enter a plea? No. Has anyone promised you anything to get, other than the negotiations in the case, to get you to enter a plea? No. Then they took up at the Alford plea. It is an Alford plea. You understand that by entering an Alford plea, you're not necessarily admitting your guilt, but you are acknowledging that the state likely has the evidence to convict you at trial. Is that your understanding? Yes. You are doing that in exchange for, or the benefit that you would gain from that is, a recommendation on behalf of the state. Is that your understanding? Yes. You understand that when you enter a plea, you are giving up your right to remain silent about this charge. Do you know that? Yes. You are giving up your right to a jury trial. At that trial, your attorney could call witnesses for you, cross-examine witnesses against you, and the state would have to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But when you enter a plea, you give up your right to a jury trial. Do you know that as well? Yes. These cases have not been indicted by a grand jury. Do you want to give up that right and enter a plea today anyway? Yes. And it is still your intention to enter an Alford plea? Yes. I want you to listen to the facts as stated by the solicitor, and I'll have a question for you as to whether or not that's what you understand the state would prove at trial. Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, so this is the solicitor talking. In regards to allegations in this case, in April of 2001, this defendant, who was 38, it says 38, but he was 37 at the time, brought the victim, who was 16 at the time, on a school tour of Bob Jones. He was the pastor of her church in New York. During the visit, the defendant did take the victim to an apartment across the street on 2 different days and fondled her breasts while lying on top of her and licked her breasts. The defendant told her not to tell anyone and used scripture to manipulate her to keep her quiet. Now, did you hear in that statement anywhere where the solicitor read into the record that he told me it was my fault? Another broken promise. Anyway, the recommendation by the state is probation and no victim contact. The defendant does not have a prior record, and the victim is present and would like to speak to the court at the appropriate time. So then the judge addressed Weaver again and said, Mr. Weaver, are those the facts that you believe the state would intend to prove at trial? And he said yes. Okay, so then it was my turn to talk. This is what I read into the record. My name is Shielagh Clark, and as much as I hate the term, I am the victim in this case. 20 years might be a long time ago for most people, but it still feels like yesterday for me, because trauma doesn't age. Neither should time wear out guilt or erode consequence. Mr. Weaver didn't just touch my body, he shattered my personhood. I need you to understand that the damage done by the physical touch was enormous, but the most pervasive harm was done with the blame that followed. For me to believe that I was evil, that my body had power I was neither aware of nor able to harness, which made the man of God do bad things and put the people I loved most in harm's way, was the key to his control. He had me chasing after legalistic methods of harnessing my sinful self in an attempt to fix his bad behavior because I believed I was causing it. None of this was accidental. It was the thrill. These events were the culmination of a carefully crafted 6-month grooming process. I was hunted like an animal, lured with the promise of a dad I needed, and then slaughtered when the time was right. When I was 17, the widow of the founding pastor of our church died after lightning set her house on fire. I thought I killed her. I thought her death was the result of my sin. When I was 18, I began starving myself to cope with overwhelming feelings I had no outlet for, because I was isolated in secrecy, fear, and confusion. When I left for college at 19 in search of freedom, I weighed only 87 pounds. When his behavior was exposed the following year, he lied and mischaracterized me, ripping from me any support structure I might have had for recovery. I was church disciplined, and the idea that I was to blame was cemented, as his sins were laid on my back, and I was run off, an unprotected scapegoat. The stress of that rejection caused me to miscarry my child, and I almost took my own life that summer, after a plea to be institutionalized for safety was weaponized and exploded in my face, and more religious men joined in the chorus of blame. I've lived the intervening years 800 miles from home, under a blanket of shame, believing that just by existing, I had broken the pastor, destroyed a church, hurt hundreds of people, and killed 3 more. because I was simply unable to comprehend that someone who represented God would hurt me on purpose and then blame me to save himself. In 2019, before I was even aware I had legal recourse, I made 2 emotional, private, unrecorded requests for the answer to the question, why me? My sole and clearly stated intention was to heal as quietly as I'd been suffering before my past destroyed my children and my marriage. But even with so much hanging in the balance for me, he stayed the course of dishonesty and the manufactured goodness he's cultivated over a lifetime for the purpose of deception. So that's the call that I told you about in August of 2019 that I was referring to there. The pathetic apology I eked out of him a few months later to facilitate his arrest was simply a chess move. One he hoped would guilt me back into silence. But even broken little girls grow up, learn the rules of the games our abusers play, and develop the courage to hold them accountable and to protect others. The defense today will likely be a smokescreen of remorse and changed behavior, but the reality is this. Every single morning of the last 20 years, Mr. Weaver has woken with the power to speak the truth, correct my reputation, and grant me the freedom of knowing I was never to blame. Yet every morning of the last 20 years, he has put his feet on the floor and made the choice to continue in this very public lie at my expense. His plea has never been about accepting responsibility, as we found out with his Alford plea. But like every move before it, it's simply a charade, designed to arrange the best possible outcome for himself. Everyone else be damned. See, the law is blind to the real issues at play here, and as such, it is allowing the defense to both ask and answer the wrong questions. Instead of asking why now after all this time, I think a more appropriate question would be, if Mr. Weaver is so righteous, repentant, and reformed, why did it ever have to come to this? And then the judge addressed me directly and she said, "Thank you, ma'am, so much. If I could just take a moment, you really moved me here today. I will tell you, I just admire your courage so much being here. I hope I don't sound patronizing or whatever when I say this, but I'm proud of you for being here. I'm proud of you for coming in here and dealing with this situation. I don't have a question of why now. This was when you were ready. This is when you were ready to deal with this, and that's the reason we're here today. In case nobody has said this, and I think that they probably have, and I think you have come to this realization, this was not your fault. This was not your fault. He took advantage of you. When I heard what you had to say, it is absolutely heartbreaking. Not just what he did to you, but the shame that you dealt with afterward. And you know, what I think is really amazing about this whole situation, and I'm not supposed to say this, I'm a person of faith too, is how God is going to use you and use what you're doing here today to help other people. And I believe that. I just want to say that to you. Good luck to you." So then, his attorney spoke. "As your honor is more than aware of handling these cases yourself when you were a prosecutor, they are challenging on both sides of the table. There are a lot of emotions at play. Most, if not all, of these cases reside around testimony and no physical evidence. So what he's basically trying to say, he's trying to discredit me the whole time he's talking, which of course is his job, right? He said, "The prosecutor and I have worked very hard over the last 8 months negotiating, talking about factual issues, evidentiary issues, what information would be available to be presented at trial." He's trying to suggest that there were factual issues or evidence issues, but there aren't any factual issues. Not a single one. And it says, while there are other events at play here, those events did not occur here in South Carolina. So he's basically throwing Weaver under the bus and saying he did stuff that didn't happen in South Carolina. What did occur here was inappropriate touching. Again, 20 years ago. Okay, 2 things just happened. He just said this happened. Even though Weaver's pleading Alford, He just put on the record, his attorney just said on the record, what did happen here was inappropriate touching. Again, 20 years ago. And then he remembered my statement and he said, the timing does not matter, but I do point that out because there is no allegation. There's no information in his history that this happened with anybody else, which again is not true. I was not the first victim, but his attorney's allowed to lie on the record. Okay, then later on he said a little bit about Mr. Weaver. He's 57. He lives in Pennsylvania. He does not live in South Carolina. It's my understanding that the victim lives here, so there would not be any opportunity for them to cross paths or have contact. And he's saying this knowing full well that Weaver has kids who live right here. So he's here. It's not like he lives in Pennsylvania and he's never here. But again, he's allowed to read things that are not true or half-truths into the record. Unfortunately for him, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's back in 2018. Last summer he applied for and has been granted disability. Basically, his days consist of staying at home and watching his elderly mother and taking care of whatever needs they have. His wife is the primary caregiver and breadwinner of the family. So listen, another blunder. They have what's called a tour company where they shuffle kids back and forth to school in the Amish community in Pennsylvania. What kind of an idiot puts that on the record when you're trying to defend your client who's been accused of sexually assaulting a child? So he quickly followed up with, Mr. Weaver doesn't drive. The commercial insurance does not allow him to be a driver, so there's no opportunity for there to be any interaction with children or minors. He could ride along. Foot in mouth. Then he pleads with the judge to transfer him to Pennsylvania immediately and let him go home because they have a business to run. And then he says, again, we're here. He wants to put this behind him. I'd like to put it behind me too, except that takes more than a court hearing for some of us. He certainly hopes that she can find closure. Realize that this in and of itself is not going to do that. But we all know that this is one step toward that process. So respectfully, I ask that you follow the recommendation. Ugh. So then the judge addressed me again. She said, I know this is unfortunately going to be with you forever, but it sounds like you're doing some things to try to make this in some small way positive. I have to take everything into consideration. I'm going to go along with the negotiations in this case because it does resolve the matter, but I'm going to give him the maximum on both ends that I can, okay? 10 years, suspended with probation for 5 years. Absolutely no contact with you, direct or indirect. And then this is the thing that was the surprise to all of us. I'm going to order that he have no unsupervised contact with anyone under the age of 18, and I'm going to transfer this case to Pennsylvania. I'm going to encourage probation to allow him to go back to Pennsylvania. Frankly, I'm not worried about his business. I really don't care about that. What I care about is you knowing he is not in the state of South Carolina. Anyway, that was infuriating on a lot of levels and also validating and kind of funny. I want to read a couple of things from my journal. On 4/21, I said, well, it's been a week since the hearing. I kind of wish I'd been better at documenting the reactions and emotions of the aftermath. But here's a summary. I obliterated Weaver's attorney in court. Completely railroaded him. I don't like to brag, but this was my moment, and I nailed it. God gave me the words and the strength and the peace, and I read and recited my statement with hardly a quiver in my voice. It was a weird experience. I was also angry, like seeing red, breathing fire. Angry. The solicitor had let them change his plea to Alford. At the last minute, without telling me. I found out at the hearing. That rage overpowered any fear that I had. Before we went in, I was super nervous and shaking. I felt nauseous. My therapist was able to come up to the conference room to do some EMDR and breathing exercises with me, and she waited in the hall to sit with me afterward to be sure I was okay. The judge was really so great. She took a lot of time to talk to me in the hearing. She told me God is going to use my voice to help others and agreed that asking why now was wrong and unfair. Weaver's attorney got antsy during my statement and really didn't seem to know what to say after. He put his foot in his mouth a few times. It was him who asked, "Why now, after all this time?" He made the mistake of telling the judge his company shuffles kids to and from school. It was the best. Can't wait for the transcript. My support system was absolutely amazing. All my siblings except Audrey showed up wearing teal, signs in hand, ready to fight for me. Cameron brought his speaker to play the audio from the courtroom loud enough for everyone to hear, and the boys and Allison scoped the place out to see where Weaver might come in so they could make him uncomfortable. It was funny upstairs, because they had a lot of people looking out the window. I'm guessing that sort of thing doesn't happen that often. Gloria made a sign that said, "Jonathan Weaver is a rapist," and had his mugshot on it. My victim advocate told Pat she didn't think they should be saying that, and he replied, "Oh, I think they should." Several other not family people came, other BJU-affiliated survivors and friends. It was so great to walk out to cheers and hugs and tears from a sea of teal. I can't even describe how wonderful that was. Gracie yelled to Weaver as he got into his van, "Stop, drop, and roll don't work in hell." She isn't wrong, but I hope it doesn't come to that. When I walked out of the courtroom, came outside where everyone was waiting, and I got lots of hugs from my family. Remember, I was hugging my sister-in-law, and I said my legs will not stop shaking, and she said, "That's because you just kicked ass in there." So here's something else from my journal in the days leading up to the sentencing hearing. I edited the statement a little, and then I left it alone for a few days. My therapist said I should let it rest and then come back to it later with fresh eyes. Brene Brown mentioned in her book, "Perfection is the enemy of good. And where you find a striving for perfection, you find shame." I've been thinking about that in relation to my statement. I'm trying so hard to perfect it. It feels like my one and only opportunity to tell the truth, to clear things up. So much shame has led to this point. But the perfect string of words isn't going to undo any of it. And something else that I've been thinking about related to the statement is trust. I find myself wrestling with this idea that God is showing his faithfulness to me and bringing justice for me. The conviction is a huge deal, but it doesn't feel like justice. The struggle is this. Do I just settle, believing that God knows what's best and sees a bigger picture? Or do I trust and believe that God is going to prove to me that he's bigger than the deciding parties? Can he move the judge's heart with my words? Is it presuming on God to ask and believe for that? I'm afraid to believe and be devastated. But just having that reservation means that I doubt. I'm just not sure why I should believe that God would do this for me when he hasn't done so for others. Do I think I'm something special? I just need for my words to be spoken into the universe and actually change something. Do I believe that God can give me the right words that can move the judge's heart? Do I dare believe that? And then, what did the judge say? "Thank you, ma'am, so much. If I could just take a moment. You really moved me here today." And then she gave him the max sentence she could give him under the plea agreement. So as I mentioned several times in the last episode, the piece that was most upsetting to me was how heavily Jonathan's voice had always weighed in comparison to mine. Back in 2005, and through this whole legal process. So when the judge listened intently to me, allowed herself to be moved emotionally by my story, and then delivered a sentence that was 5 or 10 times what we expected, it was the best outcome that I could have hoped for, given the situation. So did the church rob me? Did they do something evil? Yes, they did. But did that stop the judge from believing me? No. Did it keep the truth off the record? No. When Jonathan's case made it back to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania has a law that says that if you have two sexual crime-related convictions, you automatically go on the sex offender registry. So they automatically put him on the sex offender registry. And then his attorney applied for a sentence clarification and got him taken off the sex offender registry. I think that if my solicitor had been a little bit more creative, we could have definitely got him onto the sex offender registry for life in Pennsylvania. And that is frustrating. It's a frustrating aspect of the justice system because I don't think that solicitors get creative enough in trying to actually find loopholes and make things happen. He was given a full 30 days of credit for every 20 days that he served of his probation sentence. So probation was over for him after about 3 years, not 5. And that's been an interesting and frustrating thing to think about just because he gets to utilize, or what's a better word, exploit his medical vulnerabilities to evade consequence. And then he gets an expedited sentence, like a reduced one to begin with, and then an expedited sentence on top of that. And I get no way to hurry along the lifelong sentence that is my trauma. It really boiled my blood when his attorney said in court that Weaver wants to move past this and that he hopes that I can find closure. Because the one thing that he could do to help me find closure is to tell the truth. It's literally the one thing that I'm asking for. Just tell the whole truth. Tell any truth. And it's the one thing that he's refusing to do. But then his attorney is going to say that he wants me to find closure. I want her to find closure as long as it doesn't cost me anything. As long as all the cost is in her court, I hope she can heal from this. Anyway, so next time we're going to cover a letter sent to my sister from Peter and Lori Nargi the day of or the day after Weaver's sentencing. And then we'll get back into the progress of the civil case and some of the extra nonsense that happened after this. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
If your community is dedicated to fostering a safe and supportive environment, connect with Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment, at netgrace.org. Grace's mission is to empower Christian communities to recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse effectively. They provide vital resources and training to help churches understand the complexities of abuse and adopt effective prevention policy and trauma-informed responses.